as well. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me? Yes.
Good.
Okay, good. Wanted to say thank you, and I'm excited to be here talking about vendors and contracts and Agile and how that all works together. And let me tell you, having to deal with this in previous positions and organizations has definitely made this something that we should be talking about that maybe we don't talk about as much in courses or whatnot. So I hope that we enjoy this topic. It's probably not the most exciting topic, but it's a needed topic for sure. So here, Mohab introduced me, but if you wanted to see the wonderful slide all about me with all those wonderful certifications, which are important, but at the same time, the experience is what really matters. But I am a transformational change agent, instructional designer and trainer, and a Agile coach, and I do all three of those right now with Santeon Inc., as Mohab also mentioned. And I go by EBONY NICOLE BROWN. The reason why Nicole is in there is because I found out throughout my life that other Ebony Browns are not as outstanding citizens as I might or try to be. So I have been called to court for stealing cars and had to say I did not steal a car. So if you're Googling me for anything, look up Ebony Nicole Brown. Trust me, the other Ebony Browns are not, well, they might be more interesting, but not as interesting in the Agile field. Here, my hobbies, yep, I watch a lot of crappy reality TV. I play badminton, but my proudest accomplishment is the volunteering I do. And right now, I do a lot of volunteering at high schools, specifically here in Chicago, teaching them how to use Agile techniques within the classrooms. So right now, there's a few science classes that are using Agile techniques for their team projects. So just a very proud moment in my part, and just excited to teach Agile and bring value to, I would like to say, the world, but in everything that we do. So here on this slide, this is the IC Agile certification progress, if you will. So we have what I like to call them feathers of a peacock, but you have all these wonderful tracks that we can take. So today we're talking about vendor management and contracts, and that's under, if you notice the green feather part, under the Agile Project Management track. Santeon, as Mohab mentioned, does offer trainings in this, and I'll give more information on those. You also, for just signing up for this, will get a $200 discount to any of our courses that we have with IC Agile, and then also one lucky winner, I know, wait for it, gets a free course. So really excited about that. That will be emailed to one person at the end of, after this webinar or whatnot, just a random choosing. So I'm really excited. Woohoo! I hope y'all feel the excitement as well. I'm feeling it. So let's get started, because I know everyone wants to get back to work, right? That's a yes. So note also that this PowerPoint or this webinar is very PowerPoint driven. If you do go to one of the courses that I teach, I'm very much the opposite. Very much interactive. PowerPoint, the slides are there as a guide. But what we want to do as a class is really be able to experience and learn together. So at the end of this webinar, though, it's a lot of PowerPoint slides, but if you come to a class in person, it'll be a little different of a method or way of training and teaching. So here we have traditional project management. You know, and traditional project management tells us we need to complete the project on time, on schedule, and on budget. I don't hear much talk, right, about the people or the value. Expectations are unrealistic. In other words, see that little wonderful circle right there? I might as well be banging my head right there. Let me just bang it on the wall. And let me tell you, sometimes in my past with traditional project management, I felt like banging my head against the wall. And I can say that luckily I'm not an advocate for pain, so it's never really happened. But I can just imagine walking through a company and seeing people banging their heads against a wall filled with traditional project managers. But that's not the place I want to work, and that's not how I want to work. So Agile Project Management, on the other hand, says, look, we're going to focus on value and people because that's how we succeed in everything we do. So we're going to create value-driven products from high-performing teams. In Agile Project Manager, we know, right, we deal with much more, though, than just the inside of a team. Yes, we champion Agile. Yeah, we're responsible for facilitating and handling conflict, but we do that inside and outside the team. We're responsible for hiring. We're responsible for helping management determine roadmaps, dependencies, getting the information out there, and we're responsible for managing vendors and contracts. So all of these topics is in the Agile Project Management course that IC Agile and Santeon offers, or Santeon offers through IC Agile. But today we're going to talk about specifically managing vendors and contracts, which is very exciting to me. You just don't know, do you? So woohoo! I think I'm going to make that my new slogan. So every time you hear woohoo, that means I'm excited. Hopefully you're excited about it as well. So here we have the Agile Manifesto, which I hope everyone knows. If not, just continue to get it into your head. This allows us, these are the values right here that allow us a deeper and better way of working so that our focus is on people, working functionality, collaboration, responding to change, you know, while focusing on value in everything we do and deliver. So here in the Agile Manifesto, right, we see customer collaboration over contract negotiation. We use contracts, we have to use contracts to align and have a clear agreement between a customer and a vendor in order for us to use whatever tools or services that will help us deliver a product. So the Agile Manifesto tells us, you know, we have these values that say we emphasize this over this. So we emphasize customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And this is something that even when the manifesto was written in 2001, this has been going on for a long time, the fact that no matter what, we have to have some sort of contract because we do use outside vendors, or we procure tools, or we procure these services. It allows us to align with the vendor, it allows us to lower risk, and ensure we're creating value by doing managing these contracts. But what we don't want to forget throughout it all is that collaboration is paramount. So here we have some, you know, procuring tools, and some contracts with outside vendors are basically procuring tools, right? These are the kind of contracts I like to say I like, because they're kind of easier, right? I make a purchase of the tool that I need to get the work done. I use the tool, and then I deliver the product. Boom, got it right there. It's done. Love it. But then, oh boy, give me a big headache here, because now I may need to procure services for something. Procuring services is long, it's complex, we're dealing with people. You notice there's not many more steps, right, between procuring tools, a couple more, but it's still a longer process, it's more complex. We're dealing with people here, plain and simple, and when we deal with people, things get a little more complex. We're also dealing with very difficult, sometimes very, very complex products that have lots of changes that changes are based on the market. So what we want to do in procuring services is we want to determine what cost structure works for the team. What cost structure works for the organization, for any existing vendors we have? How do we use the cost structure that's best for us, or how do we choose the right one? We also have to choose which vendor do we want to work for, right? Do I want to work for that guy down the street, or do I want to have him working for me, or do I want to pick someone that I know is reliable, but I don't know too much about them, I've only heard about them through the grapevine? We want to choose the right vendor. How will they work with our organization? How do they fit in? And we'll go through all of these, don't worry, just in case you're really excited to get there. We also want to create a contract that's realistic, defined as much as it should be. So depending on also the cost structure we choose and how we write the contract. But the contract should be very realistic. It should be defined. It should outline the relationship between us the customer and the vendor. And we want to collaborate with the vendor. We want to make sure we have a great working relationship between all parties. And then, of course, when it's all said and done and we've succeeded and it's great, then we want to be able to close out the contract. These are the steps, just some steps taken from various places and from personal experience that I think are important in procuring services or using a vendor. So what we have here is our wonderful Agile inverted triangle, right? We say that we have fixed schedule, fixed costs, but our scope is very flexible. But how do we deal with vendors when we're Agile? You know, how do we have this inverted triangle and flexible scope and still be able to work with vendors? And what does that mean? So let's do this. We're going to start with the steps that I just previously mentioned here, and we're going to determine the cost approach. Right? We're going to choose, and real fast before I go any farther, I do want to say you can determine the cost approach first. You could choose the vendor. That's a little, I kind of say in a sense, simultaneous, or it depends on how your organization's already set up. If you already know the cost approach, you've already determined it, then you go to the vendor. Or you may have a vendor, and then from that vendor, you need to choose the cost approach. But we're going to start with the cost approach one, because there's so much to it. And I want to be able to get that into our heads initially. And then at the end, we'll do some more recapping, so hopefully we all remember it. But it's important that the relationship with the vendor, and this is determining the cost approach, but we also want to make sure as we're determining the cost approach, like I said, we're choosing a vendor, that both parties have skin in the game. We want to give each party an incentive to succeed in a win-win relationship, right? We don't want this client-vendor partner. We want collaborative business partners. So that means that as we're choosing a cost approach, we also want to make sure that that cost approach applies to that. So determining the right cost approach. Let's see. So we have cost approaches in traditional project management, right, that say fixed scope. And we have some that are more flexible, that we would say are more agile. So fixed scope, and we'll talk about these a little bit more in detail with some of these, but we have fixed price and, of course, fixed scope contracts. We also have, if you see here, flexible scope. So we have some that are time and materials, and then we have those like fixed budget with set priorities. Once again, like I said, we'll go through some of these. And I just want to say, so I have those two at the opposite ends, but you'll notice that fixed price is at the fixed scope part, and we'll definitely talk about that because I've seen fixed price cost approaches in a contract not go so well. But then we have in the middle here, right, we have time and materials not to exceed. We have phased development, which we'll talk about. We have fixed schedule. And we have this wonderful money for nothing, changes for free. I say wonderful only because it also sounds like a rap lyric, and I kind of like to say it like that. All right, probably shouldn't go there. But what you're going to see here is that some of these you can use with either, or you can mix them up, right? So I put them in the middle there, and we'll get a little more into detail on what that means. Today, we're going to talk about fixed price in the cost approach section, phase development, money for nothing, changes for free, time and materials, and I actually took out fixed budget with set priorities only because of time, so I know it's still bolded here, but Google it, look it up. I'll have something on my blog pretty soon about it and my experience with it, but if we have time, maybe I'll talk a little bit about it. If not, then we'll talk definitely about the fixed price, phase development, money for nothing, changes for free, and the time and materials. I feel like I should have said woohoo right there too. So cost approach, fixed price. Let's talk about this one first, right? The vendor works on this product based off of detailed requirements with a locked-in total price. So there's a total price that the vendor cannot go over, right? There's this ceiling up here. That means it's important and it's crucial to have detailed requirements up front. Now, this is from the vendor's point of view and the customers, but they want to make sure that it don't get dinged if they go over the price. So that means that any changes that happen become a big deal, right? So everything then becomes fixed because there's penalties if the vendor goes over this price allotted, which means everything needs to be laid out up front. We also know, or I hope we know here, that the greater the need for accuracy in our estimate, then the greater the need for more detailed information, which for us means that the more detailed information doesn't allow for changes, and is it really that accurate? So as a result of that pressure to develop this highly detailed and this supposed accurate estimate, and if you notice I'm putting accurate in air quotes here, the motivation becomes about adopting waste, right? We now have this big requirements upfront approach, creating a detailed requirement specification early in the life cycle, even though things might change. We have this change management process which strives to avoid scope creep, once again in quotes, throughout the project. And we have a software development lifecycle that is mostly serial in nature, because that's what this fixed price sets us up to be. Because of that, quality gets put on the back burner, right? Vendors try to stay within all these constraints. So it's similar to traditional project management, or what we've done not only in the past, but the traditional serial project management. And who are we kidding? When's the last time staying on budget didn't really mean going over budget? And what I mean by that is we take into account issues like fixing defects, losing money from that waste that we mentioned, that setting up all those requirements up front that didn't allow for change, and so the vendor's so rushed to get something done, to stay within these certain parameters, where we're so rushed to get something done, that quality and everything else is the last thing on our mind. Unfortunately, it also motivates teams to perform questionably, which can lead to waste. So focus here with fixed price is about it's more about getting everything in instead of focusing on the quality or the value, and that leads us to more cost in the future. As Scott Ambler put it here, the bottom line is that something has to give, whether you want it to or not. Just the way it is. Here we have fixed price 2 and a fixed price type of model. The vendor takes on the financial risk. So because of that, the vendor will want detailed requirements that they can work off of. And I mean detailed. So it becomes our responsibility, right, the customer, to develop this accurate estimate that's detailed enough to understand the requirements that supposedly will be used throughout the entire project for us putting it into production. Oh, don't be fooled. Deviation from these requirements are going to be an uphill battle. Just think about struggling up and up when we're using fixed price. I mean, you have to have change order processes in place for vendors to allow for changes. Make sure you agree on those, because vendors are going to make it hard to change requirements because all the risk is on them. So we want to make sure when we look at cost approaches, things, remember, that are beneficial. This, the vendor takes it on. It may sound all great and dandy and all of that wonderful jazz, but it's not. One person takes on all the risks. And we also know, come on, that the majority of projects will change, right? That our projects change as we deal with the customer, we learn what the customer wants, as the market changes, as we test assumptions with the customers. And if in a fixed price contract, change means friction, namely change orders or renegotiating the contract. Oh. And then there's that other little issue I was just talking about with quality. And I personally see this done. And I shouldn't say just with quality, but also sometimes the vendor may work until the price is met, even if the value's been achieved, right? So we've met what the value is, but I'm going to keep working because I have this price. Unless in the contract you said if you finish early and value is delivered, then you would get a bonus or whatnot. But we'll talk about another cost approach that kind of goes that route. We're not focused on value here, and so vendors may not focus on value. They're focusing, and they're not thinking about the price of technical debt or bad quality. So here we have time and materials, right? So now we're moving from the fixed scope part of the spectrum all the way down to the flexible scope. And we're saying here's time and materials. And what happens here is that the work lasts until enough product functionality is complete, until the end of the project is reached. So we only know the total cost of the project, right, when the end of the project is reached. So the project completion is after the stakeholders determine that the product has the right features to deliver the warranted value. Sounds great, right? I think so far it sounds great. But let's see. So here the vendor will work on a project and bill for every hour worked without regard to any financial constraints. So an estimate may have been created. We have a high level of scope here of what we're going to do, but since they're paid regardless of whether they exceed the estimated amount, they don't do more than just track time, which is good. And the good news is we're now able to focus on quality and value. And we're able to fix quality, right? Because now we're saying this is what we want to send out, and this is how it should be, and this is the quality we want it to have. However, here we, the customer, take on the financial risk. We take on 100% of the risk. The vendor has little incentive to keep costs down. I mean, why should they, right? They're working and they're charging as they go. So this is something that you want only for trusted vendors. The vendor, this also means though that the customer, us, it also makes us have a little higher effort, right? Because now we have to ensure that only legitimate effort and expenses are invoiced. Because more work equals more money for the vendor. So some good things we noticed about that. Now let's take a look at something a little different. So most of us have probably heard about the fixed price and the time and materials cost approach. But here we have this phased release development. And I put in there release. If you Google it or if you're looking for something, it's called phased development. But I kind of like sometimes to call it release development, right? Because we're developing the contracts based off when we're developing. So we're delivering functionality in these phases or releases because we're usually releasing something at this point. It could be monthly, it could be quarterly. If we're really good, it could be bi-weekly. I know some companies that release daily. But at these certain phases, budget and priorities also get adjusted. So we're taking that into account as well. So if I'm looking at a monthly phase / monthly release, then we're gonna also take a look at our budget and priorities at each of those phases, each of those increments. So here, if you notice, I have all of this, like the scope within reason. So now, I know you can see me, but let's pretend I'm jumping up and down in my seat. Because now I'm excited, right? We're getting more iterative. We're working first on the features that deliver the highest value to the end user, giving the flexibility to adjust as we go along. So when we discover a feature that we thought had really high value, and this happens, I'm sure, with y'all all the time. When you notice something that you thought had really high value and it doesn't anymore, then we're able to take a look at that in the next phase and say, wait, that doesn't have value anymore. So let's take that out. Let's put something else in. Or if there's something that's lower priority and you realize it needs to be in the next phase, then we're able to use that as a we're able to notice that differentiator and put it up into the next release. We're able to make that change. I think that deserves a woohoo right there. So in this approach, customer takes on the risk in stages. So we take on the risk in stages. Here, the vendor and the customer work together to meet these deadlines, these milestones, these releases. Thus, it becomes even more important to do release or phase planning, keeping the backlog always prioritized. And this is something that can be used with other cost approaches, right? So if we're doing time and materials, maybe we do time and materials in a phased development. It's however you want to use it, but it would be done in phases. That's our big takeaway with the phased release development. Uh-oh. So now we have the one here that sounds to me like a rap lyric. Now, once again, you do not want to hear me rap. Well, you might, but let me tell you, it wouldn't be good. So we have the money for nothing changes for free. So money for nothing changes for free is a combination of several approaches. The work here is basically a time and materials basis with a cost target, right? So the intention is that the project will not use up the entire budget. There's a target cost, but hopefully we don't use it, right? It's a target. Our goal is to finish within that target. So in this case, an initial high-level estimate of the project scope was carried out, but with the realization that scope's likely to change. What? Wait. I'm scratching my head here. Wait. You're telling me that scope changes? You don't say. Yeah, so this allows us to work with scope that changes. I guess I want to put in another woohoo right there because that's exciting, right? So if new features are added that increase the scope, so we're able to move things around here, we do note that if new features are added that do increase the scope, then what we do is we descope features of that same size, but we're still able to make changes, and it's pretty easy. So the money for nothing part takes into account that the customer will realize when enough business value has been achieved, right? We know when enough business value has been achieved because we've either assigned our business value to our features or we've prioritized and we've talked about what it is. We've worked with the customers in phases. We've shown them, and we know what it is that achieves that business value. So we know when more is not needed. So we can say, we'll stop right here because we've achieved what we've needed. Yes. Therefore, the project can be called completed, and the vendor gets back the remaining profit or percentage of the contract value that remains. So they get something. They get money for nothing is how it's looked at. The change is for free. So the parties agree, right, that if the customer wants to change scope, they get to do it. Wait for it. Yep, I'll say it again. They get to do it, and I'll even do a drum roll here with no penalty, right? There's no penalty for changing the scope. The vendor doesn't charge a change fee. So where we had fixed price, where we had all these change processes and change orders, and we had to really, vendors made it difficult for us because all the risk was on them. Sorry, or someone's thing right there, but with money for nothing changes for free, there's no penalty for changing the scope. So I know this is going to blow your mind. It's blown my mind many a time seeing this done. But the vendor and the customer are working in an agile manner. Classic. Love it. I'm going to do another woohoo right there. Woohoo! So here we have everyone establishes a target price, schedule, and scope for the project. So each feature is specified and can be developed independently of others. So removing a feature, like I said, from scope before much effort has been expended on it should have minimal impact. It shouldn't affect other features. And this allows us to estimate the effort or the price up front and still allow for agility and still focus on value. This is the money for nothing, changes for free. So here, all parties take on a shared risk. Wait, you're telling me this again, that in the beginning we had talked about collaboration over contract negotiation. You're saying that here, this is the collaboration, so all parties take on a shared risk. They both have an interest, right? We both have an interest in completing the project early. The customer has lower costs, that's us, and the vendor has a higher profit margin. They get money back if they finish early. Scope can be changed without a fee. I already talked about that. Remember, it blew my mind. Whew, crazy. Planned but unimplemented features can be replaced with other stories of the same size. Additional features cost extra, unless if we're not able to descope with the same size. And the vendor allows termination at any time without a cancellation fee. So Jeff Sutherland has a presentation out there, and that I've heard him speak about, on money for nothing, changes for free. And he recommends that the vendor allows termination at any time for 20% of the remaining contract value. But really what we're talking about here is that the cancellation fee, or when we terminate the project because we've gotten everything out there, then the vendor gets something back. I like that. I think I do. So I have this in here, trade-off slider, right? This is something we might use in project charter, or coming up with how we're really going to look at the business value for what we're doing or what we want to focus on. But when choosing a cost approach, I wanted to add this in here because I wanted to think about what is it that we would trade off. What would each party in our vendor management, our contract, what would we be willing to trade off? And I know it's the same questions that we ask in a project charter, but it's just as important, right? That will help us choose the cost approach. That could help us choose the vendor. So the customer determines the relative importance of what they're willing, and when I say customer, us, of what we're willing to give or need for the project to be successful in our eyes, right? If we don't care about quality, and then maybe, and we're so stuck on budget, then maybe we turn on budget all the way and we turn quality off and we go with the fixed price. Oh, and you could even add other pieces in here, like how much risk should the vendor have versus us, the customer. But this is a great way to gauge, right, how what our trade-offs are. We want to communicate the nuances of what we think are really important so the vendor's aware and aligned and we all agree to it. Now I will say, and I'm sure we've seen this with our project charters or anything we do, but sometimes the inclination is to put everything to on, right? I want everything on. I want to be within scope, within budget, within time, high quality, everything. But as Agile project managers, we know that that only invites risk and failure. And I'm sure, I just had to breathe right there, because I'm sure we've all experienced that, right? We've all experienced someone trying to tell us we need all of this, all of it, whether it's with vendors or even meeting project deadlines ourselves. We know we can't all be on. All the sliders can't be on. We have to have a scale. So let's recap. Just want to kind of recap here. Because we talked about the cost approaches here in bold, right? We talked about fixed price, phased development, money for nothing, changes for free, time and materials. And as an Agile project manager, it's important. It's so important to know and to determine the right cost approach that makes sense for not only your team and the way they work, but also for the organization, as well as the approaches that work with how we want to deliver. Some of these allow us to deliver in an Agile way. Some of them don't. So we want to definitely take all of that into account. So remember, we had all those steps, right? So we determined the right cost approach, or we talked about how to determine the right cost approach. we want to now determine the right vendor. So someone has to be able, right, to deliver what we need. I don't go out to the store and it just pops up. Someone delivered that. It's important to choose a vendor that will work with us and is reliable. So determining the right vendor, we want to ask some basic questions, and these are only some questions. So what will the relationship be between the vendor and the Agile team? What will that be like? You know, what will the relationship look like at an organizational level, at a team level? Can the vendor work in an Agile project environment? So do they have the right tools? Do they have the right space? Do they even understand Agile? I can only say how many times I've worked with vendors who say they're Agile and then come in and work with us and have no clue at all. But they do have an Agile Project Manager, or they have a product owner or a value team member. They have those people, but they don't really understand it. So we want to ask, do they understand Agile? But also, you know, are they able to work in this environment? Do they even understand how to work in the environment? Are they set up to work collaboratively with a team, whether it's on-site or off-site? Is the vendor able to work on-site with the team? You know, and if not, then how do we make sure there's not that gap in communication and collaboration, especially if we have a team, right, that's already on-site, or we have a remote where we have teams that are distributed, and then we have this vendor that comes in and they're distributed too. How are we going to communicate? How are we going to collaborate? Those are the questions we want to ask when we're determining the right vendor. How much experience does a vendor have? You know, do they have experience developing, successfully putting out products? If we're using a vendor for testing, which I've been with many companies that do, whether I necessarily agree with that or not, sometimes we use vendors for that, right? And so do they have the testing experience? Do they have the kind of testing we need? Because now we're testing in an Agile way. So are they able to test how we need? Are they able to develop? Do they have experience working even with Agile teams? Do they have experience focusing on value? What's their experience like? Give you like 2 seconds here just to think of some other questions that you might also want to ask a vendor. These are very basic questions. But remember, determining the right vendor is huge in making sure that we're able to work successfully. So I also want to say that it's very, very, very important. And if you were looking at the video right there, I just had so much passion when I say that, because it's so important to make sure that we verify that what the vendor is telling us is true. I have also seen that many times where we'll send out, as a company, we'll send out a description of what we're going to be working on, right? We'll send out a description of this project. Not even detailed, mind you. And vendors respond, and they'll say, oh, we could get it done this fast with this much money. And instead of doing all of our research, oh, breaks my heart, but instead of doing all the research that we need, we choose the ones that is cheap, the one that says they're the cheapest, the one that says they could get it done the fastest. And then they're not the ones that actually are able to really do the best work. But we're just so focused on price and fast and all of that instead of what's going to bring the most value. So one of my biggest words in all of this is value, right? Like, so even determining the right vendor, we have to make sure that we're determining the right vendor based off the value that they can bring, based off the value we can give them, based off the value of our working relationship. That's what we need to take into account. So this is a very, very short section, right? Determining the right vendor, because there's so much to it, but the whole point is to really make sure that you're not just going for the vendor that's going to be the cheapest and the fastest. You want to make sure that they have the experience. You want to make sure that they focus on what you need, which is, I hope, value, right? And whatever value means to your company. Because there are some companies I work with that don't need quality as much, right? Because it's not regulated as much. If you're in a government contract, and I know this presentation, we're not talking necessarily about government contracts, so I don't want to deep dive into that at all. But just to say, in that example, then you need a vendor that's able to deal with government contracts. And I know that's a whole different ballgame right there. So after we've determined the right vendor, we've done a lot, right? I mean, we've determined a cost approach. We've determined this vendor that we're going to work with and have this great relationship with. Now we're going to create a contract. So I'd like to put out there before we get too into the weeds for creating the contract that I'm not a lawyer. I used to pretend to be when I was younger, and I would have my stuffed animals, and I would have one be in the courtroom, and I would pretend to be the lawyer for the other stuffed animal, but that was many, many years ago. I did go to school for pre-law initially. I decided I'm not good at that. So I'm not a lawyer. Just want to put that out there. So these are just guidelines, right? And there are companies out there. I did not speak directly with them, so I don't want to mention their name to see if I could use their name. But there are companies that have created specific Agile contracts and contracts that I've used in the past as well as guidelines. But get a lawyer, but these are guidelines for creating a contract. And start with the project charter, and we'll talk a little bit about that more, and the information laid out in there. It's the basis of the project. It's the basis of an agreement with the vendor. So included in the contract should also be who are the people working on the project, right? So do we have the development team? Is the vendor going to be the development team, testers? Do they have their own Agile Project Manager? Will they bring in their own value member? Who's going to be working on the project for the vendor? What is the description of the work the vendor will be delivering, right? So delivery of the working functionality, and this should be emergent because we're working in an Agile way, yes. But are there artifacts too that the vendor will provide? And this is all determined right off the cost approach we've chosen. All of this goes together. And the artifacts, will they provide a sprint backlog or an iteration backlog or a product backlog or a release backlog? Will they be providing burn-up charts? Will they be providing a Kanban board? How will they be tracking? Things like that. So what is the description of the work, and what artifacts will the vendor provide? We've talked about this already, but where will the vendor be working? That should be in the contract. If we need them to be on site, and we need them to be on site 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, then that should be in the contract. If they're off-site, then are there stipulations or anything that needs to be taken into account? When does the vendor know it's the end of the engagement? Right, so what constitutes the end of the engagement? Is this the end of a fixed budget or fixed time? Is it when we get enough working functionality done, which is what some of our cost approaches told us? Is it when value is delivered? When is the end of the contract, or when is the end of the engagement? When is the end of the project? And what's our definition of done? Right, so is it developed? Is it tested? Is it integrated? Documented? Because with vendors, we may need a little more documentation. We still don't want to focus on documentation, but they're still going to, there has to be some way for us to communicate, and we have to have that written down in the contract. And then we have, why is this project being started? Why we're using the vendor? What is it that we really need from them? And how's the vendor going to work with the team? So what are the expectations for collaboration? What meetings will the vendor attend? Daily stand-ups, sprint planning meetings, or iteration planning meetings, iteration review meetings, retrospectives. What are the practices or approaches? Are they using Agile? Are they able to use their own techniques? I'm hoping, though, that we all work together, we have the same cadence, all of that. But all of this helps us align this guideline, right, of the contract, of what could be in a contract. This helps us align on how we're going to work with the vendor and how we're going to deliver a high value product. So I have in here project charter. Just this is taken from the Agile Project Management course that I give. But I wanted to put this in here too because we do want to share and work off this project charter. You know, in the same way that the project charter helps us with the team internally, it also helps the vendor relationship. You know, it aligns the stakeholders, everybody, but also aligns the vendors. It orients the vendor on what's the product idea. It synchronizes the vendor and us on the project's values and the goals. Brings the vendor up to speed on work that may have already been performed. Maybe we realize that we need a vendor after we've started working. So all of this helps us. We want to share the project charter, include the vendor in the project charter as well. And then we can have an iterative agreement. So we talked about, right, money, or we talked about this phase development, I should say, where we're looking at stages and we're able to take a look and re-prioritize and work with the vendor in phases or stages or releases, however we want to say it. This is the same thing. It's an iterative agreement, right? So we can either do it within the cost approach, we can have it in the cost or in the contract. It could be very official, or we can just have an agreement so that the vendor agrees to deliver the certain set of functionality within a defined quality standard fitting within a time-boxed period of time. We can have an agreement iteratively as well. Not to take the place of phase development, but if we're not doing phase development, then we would want an agreement since we're working iteratively. How do we work with them iteratively as well? Uh-oh. Woo-hoo. So what you're telling me now, oh gosh, that we've already chosen, or we've talked about choosing a cost approach, talked about creating a contract, and now we're going to talk about working with vendors. Boom. Let's do this. I get a little too excited sometimes. But working with vendors. Ideally, the vendor's agile, right? I mean, that would be just exciting. Ideally, they're on site and they're integrated. They can have their own experienced Agile project manager and product owner. They attend daily meetings, or they attend Agile meetings. They have the same cadence for iterations and or releases. Now, we do know sometimes vendors don't use Agile practices, as I've mentioned before. In that case, then the project manager may meet milestones that are set forth. So there should be, the vendor should have their own project manager that's meeting the milestones that we've put in the contract. It makes it more difficult. I've worked this way many times. It is tough, but it can be done. We just have to focus on communication and transparency and collaboration. And also, a lot of times working this way, the Agile Project Manager may need to stop if needed, right, to help mitigate issues on timelines or milestones, etc. Oh yeah, so now we're on our way to successfully using vendors to help us deliver a completed project. And now we're going to close it out, right? So the vendor completes to work on a contract. The Agile Project Manager has some final tasks. And if the project finishes according to the contract terms, we want to acknowledge the end of the contract, we want to ensure the vendor's paid, and we want to follow any termination instructions. So if the project's, for instance, a time and materials project, we want to ensure the vendor doesn't keep working on the lower priority items. We want to make sure we talk with the accounting department, make sure everybody's paid. And if there were any bonuses or anything for finishing early, we want to make sure that we get that out and we follow the contract. And this is us as Agile Project Managers. And finally, just to recap, we want to determine, once again, I know our time is kind of low here, so I apologize. But we want to determine the appropriate cost structure. We talked about the cost approaches. We talked about how maybe some of the best ones are the money for nothing, changes for free, time and materials, and if we do it in a phased development approach or something like that. Determine the right vendor, because that's so important in how successful we are. Creating a contract, focusing on who, what, where, when, why, and how, focusing on the value delivered, working with the vendor, collaborate, 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 communicate, 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 and I'm even going to put be transparent, right? That's how we build relationships. And then we close a contract, because we know contracts aren't over until pigs fly. Okay, I'm just joking. They're over when we've properly closed one out. So let's make sure that we've properly closed one out. All of this is great, it's dandy, it's wonderful, and we know that it's something that we end up doing, but we can't just do it, right, by reading a book. We do have to experience it, so hopefully this just gave you some guidelines or some things to think about. Like I said, we have an Agile Project Management course that I'll be teaching here in the near future, and here's the dates. I will also, on the next slide, give you a discount code. But if you want to know more information and get to know more about not only this topic, but all the Agile Project Management topics, I will be teaching the Agile Project Management course, which I know is coming up here Monday, and that's in Reston. I know all of these are in Reston right now, but we are expanding, so hopefully see you elsewhere across the United States if you can't make it to Reston. And I want to say thank you. My big, bright, wonderful colors, and we'll also email out this discount code for $200 off of any course that we have. We'll give the details in the email about the time period or anything like that in which you can take the course. And then, like I said, one lucky person, I consider it lucky, especially if you're training with me, one of my courses, the one lucky person will be able to get a full ride, right, like a free course just by listening to this webinar. So I think, yeah, that's the end of our show.
All right. Thank you so much, Ebony, for this informative presentation. And we have a couple of minutes for any questions. So if anyone has any questions, you can put on the chat window and Ebony can answer them. So we are waiting for questions.
No problem. And just to let you know, I did lose my chat and everything else. I don't know where any of that went, so you'll have to read it to me.
No problem. I'll do that. One thing also that the link, the webinar is recorded, so we will send the link once we're done with the webinar to everyone over here, including the discount code and the schedule of the classes that are available in Reston. And of course, if you have any questions regarding these courses, you can go to Santeon's website or icagile.com website. You're going to find the schedule over there too. And if you can find them, email support@icagile, and I'll make sure to connect you with the right person with Santeon to sign up for the classes. So we'll wait for another minute for any questions. Come on, guys, don't be shy.
Or just come to one of the classes and ask me all the questions you want.
All right. So again, Ebony, thank you so much for taking the time and giving us this informative presentation. We'll send the link to everyone. Have a wonderful evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are. And looking forward to see you in the classes. All right.
Great. Thanks, everyone.